Legendary items in Last Epoch aren't just something you find on the ground. No. They're something that you make. You do this by combining a unique item with legendary potential and an exalted item in the Temporal Sanctum. Legendary items aren't required for most endgame activities. You can definitely do all the dungeons, you can progress in monoliths, you can even push corruption pretty darn far and compete in the arena. However, if you're looking for a min-maxing to get the best of the best and to make the ultimate endgame character, that's when you want to get into legendaries. Also, some of them are pretty darn available from early on. I'll get into all of that and much more in the upcoming video. If you want to learn more about Last Epoch's mechanics, how to make builds, or what I'm going to be playing, then do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, and let me know down below what you'd like to see in Last Epoch videos. I might have already made it and can link it to you, or alternatively, if something's highly requested, stay tuned and watch out for it in future uploads. That said, let's get into things. Starting with making legendary items using the Temporal Sanctum. To start off with, when you enter the Temporal Sanctum, you're given only one option, to do the first level, but you'll end up unlocking the second, third, and fourth by defeating Julra at the previous difficulty each time. This is important because what you need to do to make a legendary item is go to a compatible Eternity Cache. This is dependent on the level requirement for the unique item you're putting in. So if your unique item requires level 1 or 2, something like Bleeding Heart, then you can do it at any level. But let's say it's a much higher level item, requiring level 60 or something. Then you're going to need to do at least level 2 in the Temporal Sanctum. And certain endgame items require level 4, which has no further restrictions. But keep in mind that a level 4 Temporal Sanctum, or Tier 4 Julra as she's more often called, is a difficult and challenging encounter, requiring that not only you play well, but also have a quite strong build. At that point, your next job is to proceed through the Sanctum Maze. The entire thing takes place in 2 different timelines simultaneously, with a special dungeon ability to swap between them. I use a custom keybind for this, but you can find the default keybinds in the game's menu. In short, some passages will be blocked depending on the timeline you're in, and as you swap between them, you'll find a path to the end. There are also multiple exits to progress to the next level, so if you get stuck, you can go a different way. Just keep in mind that the different way you go might influence the rewards. Sometimes the monsters can drop an extreme amount of exalted items, or alternatively, some of the rewards buff Julra herself. If you plan to go into the Temporal Sanctum, you might also want to load up on some prophecies, but for more on that, do check out my Circle of Fortune guide, which I'll link up in the card and down below, and you can watch it after this. After you progress to the end, you'll fight Julra herself. And this fight is honestly pretty darn annoying, because she's very powerful and kind of anti-melee. As the fight begins, she uses a room-wide ability that will insta-kill most characters after a very long cast delay of, I'd like to say, about 10 seconds. What you have to do to avoid this is shift into the other timeline. She'll then join you shortly after wiping out everything within the previous one. Don't worry, you can go back there later. Now, as soon as she shifts in, she'll drop a really annoying dot puddle on you that you have to kind of dodge and place towards the edge of a room so that you don't stand in it later. After that, she'll usually use an ability or two, then activate her stupid spinny beams, which is absolutely the worst ability in Last Epoch. It is so easy to take a step by accident and get clipped by one of these, and it's pretty much instant death for most builds, especially on T4. So there's 2 ways to do this. One, if your build is very good at setting up for burst damage, what I personally do is simply skip the spinny beam phase by shifting into the other timeline and waiting for Julra to arrive. I then drop my burst on her, which whittles her way down slowly but safely. The alternative is finding places to stand where you can move very slowly and precisely. This way you won't get clipped by the beams, you're standing in the safe zone, and you can keep DPSing her. This is, generally speaking, the better way to do the fight. It doesn't rely on burst damage, but it's also a little difficult because if you make a mistake, the beams will absolutely annihilate you. Try to get extra defenses against void damage to give yourself the most survival possible. And so here you have it, the Eternity Cache, an object that exists within 2 timelines simultaneously. First, you'll need to put in your unique item that has legendary potential and the exalted item you combine it with. A little more about that in the next section of the video because there are some special rules to consider. Once you put it in the Eternity Cache, you seal the cache and then warp to the ruined future, at which point you'll find your legendary item. The item takes 1 random stat from the base exalt and transfers it to the unique, per legendary potential. So a 1 LP item will be your original unique plus 1 stat. 2 LP will be plus 2, all the way up to the incredibly rare and powerful 4 LP that perfectly transfers everything from the base item. In general, 1 LP items are relatively common and easy to get, but 4LP is incredibly rare and is really only something that you should use when you're absolutely sure you're happy with the outcome. Now that we've talked about the basics of smashing two items together to make a legendary, let's talk about a few of the specifics. Starting with the Exalted base that you use. It must be Exalted, meaning at least one modifier is tier 6 or tier 7. It must have 4 affixes on it, and you can only transfer regular affixes on the item, not sealed affixes. This means if you have something bad on the base that you want to use, yes, you can use a Glyph of Despair to seal it so that it won't be in the pool. But that doesn't mean you'll have a chance to transfer some super sick 5th sealed affix to your item by magic. Just keep that in mind when you're making these. Another restriction has to do with item factions. If one of your items is tagged Circle of Fortune or Merchant's Guild, the other must either have the same tag or not be tagged at all. You cannot make an item that requires both Circle of Fortune and Merchant's Guild, since no one's figured out how to be a double agent and join both at once. The game kind of makes that impossible. And the last thing you should keep in mind is that not all unique items are created equal. There's actually a very big difference between an item's level requirement and its chances of rolling legendary potential. This is called LPL, or Legendary Potential Level. In essence, the item's level for the purposes of rolling legendary potential is treated as different from the requirement to equip it. You can see this in an item database such as we have over at Maxroll. The point of this is to make some items relatively easy to get in the early game, but, given their power level, a bit more difficult to get with legendary potential. A good example of this is the Bleeding Heart. It's a low-level item. I've frequently dropped them during the campaign, but its LPL is 40. So for the purposes of rolling legendary potential, it's treated as a level 40 item, meaning you're not really going to see very many LP Bleeding Hearts while you're going through the campaign. I'm not saying it's impossible, I am just saying it's unlikely. So here are a few best practices when it comes to picking your bases. First, if you're trying to create a legendary item that only needs one really good affix, don't worry about the base aside of the one affix that you need. Also, don't worry about the base type within its item class, since that gets completely destroyed as the item's stats are transferred over to the unique. For example, if I want to make a Woven Flesh with Dexterity, all I care about is that the Exalted chest has T6 or T7 dex. I don't care about any of the other stats, since if any of the other stats hit, I'm going to throw them away anyway. Whereas on something like this 2LP Talons of Valor, I tried to care about multiple rolls on the item. And in fact, I got everything except for the mod that I wanted. And that's another important lesson. No matter how much you prepare, unless you're crafting with 4LP bases, sometimes you will just get unlucky, at which point it's back to farming and target farming. Speaking of, do you want to see an updated target farming guide? I have one that I'll link below, but there are a few new ways to target farm with things like Circle of Fortune prophecies. Let me know down below if you want to see that. But that's all I've got in terms of the basics of how to make a legendary item in Last Epoch and some best practices while you do so. If you want to know more about crafting, then check out my full crafting guide, as that covers a lot of the other crafting aspects in much more detail. Or alternatively, if you want to read more about legendary items, check out the guide over at MaxrollGG. Before I go, I'd like to take a minute to thank my patrons and channel members for continued support. For as low as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is, of course, down below. I'd also like to thank everyone who made it to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this deeper dive into legendary items, as I was getting a lot of questions about it and figured it was better to sum it all up in one place here, rather than answering it 50 times and then getting asked 50 more. And so with that said, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again in the next one.